Hello friends, for today's video I want to go through my top 10 books that I picked up in 2025. I will also have the worst 10 books that I picked up in 2025. If that's a video you're interested in, I'll have it linked. Also, I am doing my top 10 a little bit differently this year than in years past. So throughout the course of the year, many of you who watch are familiar with this, but if not, as I go through the year, at the end of each quarter, I go through what I felt were the best new fantasy releases that I had picked up from that quarter, and then separate from that, I go through the books that I thought were the best of the ones I picked up from backlist fantasy as well as other genres. And this is a way for me to keep my reading balanced. It also, I think, allows for me to assess how trends are shifting, because then you're always kind of looking back at fantasy from before and then other genres, of course, but then you're also seeing what's new, what's popular now. Is there a lot of the same thing being released? And also, what about the quality of the writing? How does that change? And it just allows for my reading to be hopefully more diverse and varied, and then also then I can have conversations like that with all of you. However, usually what I'll do is once the year has concluded and I go through my absolute favorites, I continue to keep those separate. And this year, the thing that has changed is that for this top 10, I wanted to pull from all of the quarterly wrap-ups of my favorites, from best of old fantasy as well as the other genres, and then have the new fantasy releases as well. And this will help me determine where I fall when it comes to, do I think that fantasy is shifting in a direction that maybe I don't like as much? Do I feel like it's a good balance where, yes, you can still find those gems, but then also you'll find gems from before? And it actually turned out to be decently varied. Some of my favorites from the year weren't fantasy. Some of them were fantasy. Some of them were self-published. Some of them were new. Some of them were older. So there is a good mix on here. If you're interested in any of these books, I will not only have them linked in the description bar, but because this is going to be more of an overview style video, I'll also have any additional more in-depth reviews linked so that you can check them out if you so choose. All that said, I wanted to actually go through all of the books that were mentioned so you know what the pool is that I'm going to be taking books from. So starting with my new fantasy books that were my favorites over the course of the year, one more thing to note before we go through that list is that at the very beginning of the year, January, February, because the year has only just started, I do allow myself to pick up books that were released the year prior, because so far there's not really a whole lot out. It's the very beginning of the year. So a couple of these technically did get released in 2024, but for the most part, the majority of them are actually releases from 2025. They still fall under the umbrella in my mind as new. Brave Empire by Richard Swan, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, Green Teeth, A Forgery of Fate, Trials of Empire, that's one of the ones that technically was released the year before, Blood Over Bright Haven, A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, Engines of War, The Summer War, Birth of a Dynasty, A Drop of Corruption, and The God and the Quisheen. Even within this list, there's a little bit of variety. So we have some that are parts of series, conclusions to series. We have standalone stories. We have new entries into new series. And I am going to mention right off the bat that there were 2 entries on this list by Richard Swan, those 2 being Brave Empire as well as Trials of Empire. However, neither of these broke into the top 10. They were both really fantastic, but these are very much like the honorable mentions. Technically, you could say any of them from this list of 12 and the other list of 12 we'll get to in just a moment. You could say that most of these are honorable mentions by default, but truly, I really debated, do I think that these should be in the top 10? And there was just a couple that I think overall impacted me more, that I thought were maybe thematically more significant, or I just genuinely enjoyed them or had more fun with them. But those were both really fantastic, and I wanted to take note of the fact that he had 2 different books that were in my favorites over the course of the year. As for backlist fantasy and books from other genres, we had Talonsister and Titan Child by Jen Williams. These were both part of a duology, and typically I don't like having books that are part of the same series within the list. I like to just group them together, but they were both so good that I had to mention both of them within a favorites. A Fire Endless, Apothecary Diaries, specifically volumes 10 and 11. I say volumes even though they're light novels, meaning they are actually books, but if you haven't heard anything about light novels before, they're a little bit different than your typical novel, but they are fully novels. They're not manga, but we don't need to get into the details of that today. But specifically, entries 10 and 11 I thought were fantastic. Lady Tan's Circle of Women, The Stationery Shop, To Shape a Dragon's Breath, A River Enchanted, Just for the Summer, Children of Gods and Fighting Men, Dragon Mage, and the 13th child. As I was going through my top 10, I already noted that the Richard Swan books, I was really close. I really debated whether those should go into the top 10, but there were some that I thought, you know, these really stood out to me a little bit more. So we're going to jump into it. No particular order. It's not like 10 is my least favorite of these, 1 is the best. I'm just going to jump straight into it. And I have to give Children of Gods and Fighting Men a spot in this top 10. I said since I read it that it's one of my favorite historical fantasy books I have ever picked up. I have, since picking up the first book, continued on with the series. I am absolutely loving it. I am devouring it. It just is one of those stories that when you read it, you think, man, I just want more of this in my fantasy. I want more historical fantasy that feels like this. I want character work that feels like this. I want world building that feels like this. And because it's historical, that does mean that the world building is very much within our own world and the folklore in this particular area, which happens to be in Ireland. And you feel like the author not only knows so well all of the historical context to create this that feels so real, but additionally, how it is laid out for you, how you get to know the world and the characters is all so seamless. It's fantastic. I can't say enough how much I just wish there were more books like this. I've described it before as far as one of the characters feeling like Cersei Lannister from A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, that it feels like one of the characters, you kind of hate them in the same way you hate that character. And there are other characters throughout the story that you also grow to hate. And there are characters that you love and you just find yourself thinking, if this character dies, it's only going to increase my hatred for this character over here because they won't stop scheming and I hate them so much. And I just love when you get so sucked in and you root for characters at times. There's a lot of gray morality. Other times you're like, when is somebody going to finally take this person out? And you get so invested. I loved it. And I just wish there were more fantasy books like this and that were so polished and well written and really truly felt like they were bringing the world to life so seamlessly. It's fantastic. Oh man, I'm so excited that this author has written another book after this series. I can't wait to devour whatever else Shauna Lawless puts out. I thought it was amazing. Next up, we have Dragon Mage. If you like a dragon story, if you like that kind of classic, almost sword and sorcery feel to your story, but if the thing you especially like is an amazing friendship between characters, look no further because this book has one of my favorite friendships in anything. We also have a main character who is neurodivergent, and so getting to see a character who is so different from so many other of our protagonists and get to see them still shine, get to be a hero, and get to be very brave is unlike a lot of the other stories we've gotten. Also, the character that is their friend is almost that classic protector, noble character, but he also has so much life breathed into him because it's very difficult, I think, to have a character that feels so similar in their general makeup to other characters we've gotten before, yet still feel unique and original and feel like they have their own personalities. And I think the author accomplished that really, really well. And how these two are friends with each other is really beautiful. It was so nice to see. I feel like it raised the bar when it comes to friendships in stories. And you really see from the time they're boys into adulthood how much they care for each other, are there for each other. And they're just both fantastic on their own and fantastic together. They're just the best blueprint for how to write great friendships. But the world itself is also really, really fascinating. And again, there is that classic feeling. There is that almost sword and sorcery type of fantasy present within this, but with enough about it that feels original. How the lore is delivered to you, how you are set up to question the lore, how the characters are set up to question the lore, all of those things constantly keep you engaged. And how you get to see these boys grow into men and how they're shaped by their environments is fantastic. I wouldn't say it's necessarily exactly like the book Bloodsong, but just to kind of give you an idea of another story where you're watching characters from the time they're children into adulthood and how you see the way that their lives really are impacted by their environments, but how there is a kind of core piece of them always present. I think that's a decent comparison, though I wouldn't say that if you like one, you'll definitely like the other. It's just laid out in a similar fashion. Also, it is one of those stories where I genuinely feel like there is quite a moral conundrum at the center of it. So some of your antagonists are not just ruthless, generic evil characters. You kind of understand where they're coming from, and there is almost a tier of evil, you could say. There are some characters where you don't like them and you feel like what they're doing is wrong, but you also kind of understand where they're coming from. And then there are characters, of course, who are just trying to take advantage of situations so that they can gain as much power as possible. And then you have the victims of the scheming of these other characters, and so you inherently feel like they are the good guys, but also if they live the way they want to live, it is in opposition to what might be better for all of society. So there are really difficult questions that appear in this story, which I think definitely raises the stakes. Next up, we have 2 books that I read around the same time, and while the world building is very, very different, and the characters are very different, I do think thematically there are some parallels between the two, so if you like one, there's a chance you might like the other, and those would be Blood over Brighthaven and To Shape a Dragon's Breath. To Shape a Dragon's Breath follows a young girl who finds a dragon egg, and she starts raising it, but she is part of an indigenous group of people, and it is not allowed for people to have dragons without the supervision of what is basically their current government. And this government forces her to go into this school alongside a lot of other young children who have also dragon companions. And they are meant to basically go on this track toward serving the government, serving the military. And our character cannot really escape the forced assimilation and also having to go to the school, because if she does, she risks the safety of her dragon. So she's basically torn from her family, and she's forced into an environment that is very different from how she grew up. And additionally, on top of all of that, she is mistreated for being different from a lot of the other people in this environment. And there is so much commentary within this. It very much is not hiding the fact that it is basically historical fiction, though it has a few things tweaked. For example, the fact that there are dragons, of course, but then there are a few other components that are slightly changed. It wears its not only inspirations, but its commentary very much on its sleeve. But it was absolutely fantastic. The sequel is coming out very, very soon. I've seen it marketed and sold in both young adult and adult, and I think that makes sense because there are aspects to it that feel very adult, that feel like if you are an adult kind of observing this scenario, it really pulls at you to watch a child be mistreated and forced into environments that are outside of their control, that don't treat them well, that don't serve them. You really feel for that character, but if you yourself are a young person and you're reading it, I think there's a lot that you can connect with and relate to because of the fact that it does kind of have that school setting and this figuring out how you fit into a world that seems to be at odds with both what you love and grew up with versus what apparently the future has in store. So I do think there is a lot to this that makes it accessible to a lot of different readers and people who like different age ranges. Blood over Brighthaven is a standalone, and there are some thematic pieces within this. Mainly what happens when you are a part of a system that actively is doing things that cause harm to other people, but supposedly for the sake of innovation and progress. You do see, though, that I think our character in the Non-Pasha Way Is It series, she for sure is less complicit in things. Our other character is so focused on the ways that she has been wronged in life that she doesn't seem to have any of her attention span left for recognizing all the various ways in which she has benefited from society, and whether intentionally or not, kind of completely neglected the way that her actions and the things that she gets to have in life are at the expense of those who have been mistreated. She only really has an eye for what else she doesn't have just yet. And then there's a lot of commentary on how another character who is it's a dual perspective story, so they kind of share the spotlight, how this character has been treated and how these two understand each other, get to know each other, and fit within this world, but it's part of a world that they don't want to fit within. It is fantastic. I absolutely love this. One thing I want to say, though, about both of these, I kind of said it about To Shape a Dragon's Breath, but it's true of Blood over Brighthaven as well. As noted, they do not by any means hide their themes, and I do think there's a difference between when your themes are overt versus when your themes are repeated over and over again to you as if you, the reader, are an idiot. And I don't think that either of these books did that. I think they're very, very clear, they're very blunt, they're very straightforward, but I do think that sometimes it's not really necessary to try to be subtle, because sometimes the things that are going on in our world are very much right in front of our faces, so it kind of makes sense that sometimes, depending on the themes that you're tackling, they also might be shown within their fantasy worlds, of which both of these are, to be a little bit more overt. I think it makes sense in these scenarios, but of course it's going to vary from person to person as to whether or not they like that or want their themes delivered in such a way. Regardless, thoroughly enjoyed both of these, and I highly, highly recommend them. Next up, we have Talonsister and Titan Child. I mentioned before that these took up 2 slots when it came to my quarterly wrap-ups and favorites of the quarter. This time around, I am grouping them together just because I wanted to ensure that I had 2 other spots open, because I did this again for another duology. So I am grouping these together, but regardless, the point is that I thought they were great. I was just so immediately engrossed in this story. I thought that the characters were delivered well. As usual, Jen Williams has phenomenal world building that both feels familiar and unlike anything else. And the way that everything was paced, the mystery at the center of it all, and then of course some pieces of genre blending that were present just made this an absolutely phenomenal standout duology. It is one of my favorite series, probably of all time at this point. It is so good, so good, and there's a lot of perspectives, so there's a number of things to mention within the setup, but I'll try to be brief because of the fact that this is more of an overview, and also I've talked about it so much as of late that you've probably already heard about it. But the point is that the story follows a number of various different characters, and they live within a world where at one point there were a lot of mythical beasts that roamed their land, and these beasts were known as Titans, and they came in a lot of different forms. Most of the forms are some kind of mythological creature that we are familiar with, so dragons, wyverns, griffins, those sorts of things. And at some point, most of them have died out, and there are a few remaining. Very, very few though, and most of them are within this area known as Brittletane. The bones that have been left behind of the Titans that have died out, you can utilize those, alchemists can utilize those to enhance people's bodies and create what are basically super soldiers, but there are some consequences to doing this, of which you explore over the course of the series, and the more antagonistic forces within the story are eager to try and attain more Titan bones, which leads a little bit of an expedition with some of the perspectives, and then some of the other characters are brought together through the fact that there is a former soldier who now wants to try to determine what is going on with some of these memories that she's starting to get back, and she ends up going to this place known as Brittletane. It is so good. I mean, I'm a sucker for mythological creatures, which you of course get within this. I absolutely love that epic fantasy feel that Jen Williams is just so good at and efficient at, because of course I, like many fantasy fans, am happy whenever I pick up a series and I know there's a lot of entries, because you just think, oh good, more and more fantasy goodness for me to devour. However, I do think there's something to compliment about an epic fantasy that can be accomplished in 2 books and in a very satisfying way. I cared a lot about these characters, similar to what I was saying about Gale Song, Children of God, Gods and Fighting Men. Man, some of these characters you just despise, and they're so slimy and awful, and then other characters have a lot of gray morality, and you kind of like them, but you're thinking, I wish you would sort of change direction here. You have other characters that you're like, these characters better live happily ever after, and you get very invested. I can't say enough good things about it. I thought it was great. Speaking of unlikable characters, next up we have Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. This is one of the few times that I felt like a Goodreads winner. I really thought it was deserved, because I thought the writing in this was exquisite. I thought the way the thematic elements were accomplished were great. I also was impressed at the amount of different themes that we had present within this story, of which there are many. I thought they were all accomplished really, really well. Some of them are more obvious and some of them are a lot more subtle, but the way they kind of just bleed into each other was great. And I also was really intrigued throughout the course of the story. And that feeling of, when I said, speaking of unlikable characters, that kind of feeling throughout of discomfort of like, oh wait, hold on. I don't like what just happened. Or I kind of think that's not an okay thing to do. And you're just watching this descent throughout the course of the story. And there's also horror components within this. It all was really, really well done. And how it all came together, I thought was masterful. I really thought this was V.E. Schwab at her best. It's not going to be for everybody, of course, which is true of every book, but I did think that this one, the praise was well deserved. And I mentioned how I thought the writing was exquisite. Truly, I at times just kind of wanted to stop and think like, that was just so lyrical, and it had no reason to be. We didn't need to make that part so lyrical, but we did. And how everything pulled you in this kind of dark, sinister way, I thought was quite a feat. If you don't know anything about this story, I don't want to say too much, because I actually think the less you know, the better, but you do follow multiple perspectives, and you're going back and forth between present day and the past. You don't know entirely how the perspectives are connected. You kind of learn that as you go. And it is a slower moving story. I do think this is one of those books that if you're going to give it a try, you probably have to give it some time, because in order for there to be the payoff, you do kind of have to allow for things to develop, which I think they develop very, very well. After that, we have the Elements of Cadence duology. So we have a River Enchanted and a Fire Endless. And these two truly I'm grouping together because I think that as a whole, the duology is quite good. I actually had a River Enchanted as almost kind of an honorable mention when I had read that. And then when I read a Fire Endless, I thought a Fire Endless really concluded the story in a very, very satisfying way, and it patched everything up really well. I talked about how I thought the writing in V.E. Schwab's book was really good. The writing in A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless I thought was fantastic. And I'm overusing these adjectives, but that's what happens when you have a whole video dedicated to books you thought were great. But the writing in this was beautiful. I always come back to talking about how much I enjoy Rebecca Ross's writing, specifically in this duology too. I liked it in Divine Rivals, but I thought it really shined here in these two books. Where I was saying with V.E. Schwab's writing that I thought it was good, V. Schwab has something to her writing that has a rhythmic quality that I find very satisfying. I don't know if it's almost this musician thing or something, but how it flows is really satisfying. Like the amount of syllables in the words, how she utilizes the different amount of words within a sentence. Is this a shorter sentence? Is this a longer sentence? And how it all fits within the paragraph. It just flows in a way that I really, really enjoy. Though I don't know that I could point out a passage and necessarily go, oh, this is just so striking in the word choice she's using. The words are so beautiful, or what it evokes is just so creative. It's not exactly that. It just has this feeling to it. Whereas Rebecca Ross is pretty. It does evoke imagery, and it's very good at transporting you to the setting, which I think is what really shined for me in this duology. And because there are musical components actually within this duology, I thought Rebecca Ross really accomplished that quite well. I think it's a hard thing to do, of course, because you're missing the actual sound of it. So when you have music as an integral part of the story and you still manage to create a lot of those feelings that music creates, and you have this sort of sweeping melodic feel to it, I think that's very impressive. And to have that feel in a story where it's kind of complementing what is happening with the characters and it brings them to life in their own way because of how music is connected to them, I thought that was fantastic. And I just liked the characters in this. I liked the relationship building over the course of this duology across the various different kinds of relationships. You have sibling relationships, romantic relationships, friendships. You have people that are at odds with each other, people that want to have familial bonds, but there are things that put stress on that to the extreme. But I really just enjoyed being in this world. I thought it was great. It's not necessarily the most interesting plot, and I wouldn't say I had to turn the page because I had to know what happened next. It's so fast-paced and action-packed. It's not that kind of a story. Just one that I enjoyed sitting in. Kind of, I would say Dragon Mage matched that as well. You just want to get lost in this fantasy world. I think that those books accomplish it very, very well. And now to highlight some of our books that weren't fantasy, but that I thought were absolute standouts, and I couldn't not put them on this list. Of course, I think nobody's surprised. I have fallen head over heels for Apothecary Diaries. I started the anime around when it came out for the first season, rewatched the first season in preparation for the second. I was one of those people that, oh man, it was killing me as the episodes were coming out each week. I was like, why do you have to do this? I just want to watch the rest of it. And if there was a delay, I was like, come on. So I was really, really invested. And then once the season ended, myself and my friends were like, well, I need more Apothecary Diaries. And the source material is the light novels, and the first two seasons of the anime go up through light novel 4. So we read through those, and then we read past, and I may have gotten way ahead of our read-along that we're still currently doing, because I read through basically everything that I could, meaning 14 different books total. So volumes 10 and 11 were... Man, I was just saying that some of our other stories are not necessarily the page-turner kinds. But volume 10 of Apothecary Diaries, things just really start coming to a head that have been hinted at for a long time. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, I I'm so on the edge of my seat actually right now. This is kind of unexpected. It's not necessarily an edge of your seat kind of story. There's a lot of core intrigue. Also, one of the main reasons so many people love the series is the character Mao Mao. She is the best main character. And she's very, very funny. Also, the story as a whole is funny. The writer, I think, just has a great sense of humor. But regardless, I was shocked at how on the edge of my seat I was while reading Volume 10. And I thought, this is the best volume of this series. Cue Volume 11, which for a while I was not thinking was going to be out Volume 10. But the politics, which I love some good core intrigue and political intrigue, and Volume 11, I didn't think that the intrigue could get better, but Volume 11, I was like, man, what are we gonna do? And there's also probably I'll say the best antagonist in this section of the story. I don't want to give too much away, but the antagonist, I'm like, man, for once, our characters are being outsmarted, so I was really, really into that. And then it just, all of a sudden, something happens, and if you've read it, you know probably what I'm talking about. Something happens, and you're like, wait, what? And then you find out more about some other characters and plot lines, and you're like, oh my gosh, the foreshadowing is strong with this one. I mean, I was just, I was so invested, and I was like, dang, wow, I was not expecting that. I was really blown away. So I had to give it a spot here, because even though light novels are a little different than your typical novel, and I did debate, I feel like it's almost slightly different format, and it's not the easiest format to get into. It's also translated, so there's a lot that you probably kind of have to meet it where it is, and you almost have to prep yourself for the fact that it's going to be different if you are going to give it a shot, because it's very unlike most other things that probably a lot of us are accustomed to. But I ultimately was like, I have to mention it, because I was just so invested in what was happening. So I couldn't not talk about Apothecary Diaries. As for the remaining two, these are back to our more typical novel format, and that would be Lady Tan's Circle of Women and the Stationery Shop. Lady Tan's Circle of Women actually has, if you like Apothecary Diaries, I think there's a lot of aspects to it that you would like about this one, but it does not have basically any humor. It's actually very, very tragic and quite dark at times, but you are following what was a real woman in history, though this is a fictional story, and she is one of the first women to have written accounts of basically being a doctor. And so she has a lot of information about medicine and treating people, and she documented all of this, and so you can still go back and find her writings, and it ended up being very impactful to the development of medicine over the many, many years after she passed away. But she also was somebody who was very trapped through the fact that there was, of course, a lot of sexism at the time, and she did not have a lot of freedom. It is almost miraculous that she even was able to attain this knowledge, but then to go on and practice it and write it is a feat all on its own. And you see just how difficult her life was, and how difficult the lives of the women around her were, and how it was so challenging even to be allowed to treat those other women. And she was a woman who was considered of a slightly higher rank, and there was a lot of negative views to anybody who worked with blood, and so there's that whole component of the story as well. And there's just this general, even if she knows what she's talking about, there is this, well, but no, this man over here, even though what he's doing is not causing this person to get better, we're still just going to keep letting him do his thing, and don't you dare try to treat somebody, and you're like, that person's going to die, we'll just let her help them. And so there was a lot in this that was really, really tragic. And I thought the author did a fantastic job of not sugarcoating anything. Because this is a historical fiction story, our main character takes part in things that it's very easy for us in present day to look at and think, but how can you think that's okay? But at the same time, there are going to be things about our own lives now that if we were to look back at ourselves in this moment, that we also would be like, I can't believe I never questioned X, Y, and Z. I actually did a whole video dedicated to how to write a morally complex character based off of this story, because I was so impressed by how the author accomplished it. It's very tragic. It's very, very good. And in some ways, it's kind of inspirational at the same time. I thought it was phenomenal. As now for the Stationery Shop, this story was beautiful and very tragic. You are looking at two characters who are at a point where one of them is probably going to pass away soon. They are both quite elderly and they've lived a lot of their lives, but when they were very, very young, they lived in Tehran and they were very in love with each other. They had plans of marrying one another, but a lot of unrest tore them apart, and so you're exploring what that unrest was, and then you're also following our main character over the course of her life and what has transpired since then. And you are looking at an area where you're seeing how she grew up in this place and she knew some of what was going on, but then how, regardless of whether you're involved or not, when things happen, it's going to affect you. And so you also see aspects of being an immigrant, of wanting to return to where you were, but there's not the safety and opportunity there. But then the way you're treated so differently in this new place, and you're sometimes just forced into things based off of your circumstances that you don't want to be a part of, but then people mistreat you regardless. You're also seeing struggles when it comes to having a child and infertility, and also when your children are sick. And there's a lot that happens over the course of the story that is very, very heartbreaking. And the way that generational trauma is done in this story is heartbreaking, but very, very well done as far as how it's woven into the present day plotline, the plotline of our main characters in their past, and then also an understanding of what transpired before and how it impacts now. I thought it was very, very good. The writing is very pretty. I know that this author has written other things, so I will definitely be looking into more of their works. I do want to note two more things before we wrap it up, which is one, I don't put nonfiction on these lists typically because while of course nonfiction and fiction can both increase our empathy, help us have better understandings of various circumstances other people are in or other people in general, well, I think they can both accomplish that very, very well. And of course, they're both delivered to you in written form, so of course there is the opportunity to comment on the writing itself. At the end of the day, I do feel like there is oftentimes a difference between fiction and nonfiction, and when we're talking about nonfiction that is about very important topics, it just feels a little weird for me personally. I'm not saying it's wrong for other people to rate them or have them included in these sorts of lists, but for me personally, I just don't feel great about putting them up against each other. So I do want to shout out the book Devil in the Grove. This is following Thurgood Marshall and the Groveland Boys, and it's looking at a lot of the atrocities that were committed not so long ago and how difficult it was to have a fair justice system at this time and the fight that it took to get anything even somewhat resembling justice. It was fantastic, so I highly recommend that one. I'll have it linked as well, and I will have a video coming out soon where I go more in depth with this particular book. The other thing I want to note is I believe there were a couple of times over the course of the year where I might have accidentally had some overlap when I had books as my best of the quarter, because they were books that kind of, I started reading them in one quarter and then finished them in another, and I think just through bad note taking I accidentally repeated things a couple of times, and I'm very sorry about that because I don't like doing that. So I'm so sorry that I accidentally did that. I still ended up having 12 books total for backlist and other genres and new fantasy, but I think I ended up getting a few things mixed up. So I just wanted to apologize for that, and I will take better notes this year to ensure that doesn't happen. That has not, I don't think, happened in the past, but I just felt like saying sorry for that goof. Anyway, I hope that you all have had a fantastic year, a fantastic reading year. Let me know your thoughts on any of these books, and let me know what your top book was of 2025. If you can't narrow it down to one, maybe let me know your top 3. Or also if you're like, I can't narrow it down at all, but here are some that I think you would like or that I think are underhyped. If you want to shout out some books, please feel free to do that. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.